Dickens doesn't seem to be a great cake fan, but the one novel where his characters do seem to love cake is David Copperfield, and I wonder whether it's because it's such an autobiographical novel for him. He's remembering that childish sweet tooth, that longing for something sweet and exciting. And then what I'm going to make now is some gingerbread inspired by Betsy Trotwood, David Copperfield's aunt's great friend, Mr. Dick, who loved gingerbread so much David opened an account for him at the local cake shop. This recipe is another one from the great Eliza Acton, and even though she's quite an early Victorian cook, you can really tell she made everything herself because her instructions are very precise and everything she does works really well. We're going to start with 450 grams of flour. Now I'm using self-raising flour. She would have used plain flour because you didn't have raising agents until slightly later in the century, but it's nice just to have a little bit of lift in the cake. We're adding quite a lot of ginger, about a tablespoon of ground ginger. Remember that ginger loses its flavour really quickly, so it's best to buy small amounts, use it up quickly. And then this is the secret ingredient for this cake that I absolutely adore. It's ground cloves. Nothing to do with the dentist, but it kind of harks back to early medieval gingerbreads, which would have been decorated with little box leaves and gilt and ground cloves studded into them. And the taste works fantastically well. So that's our dry ingredients mixed. Now we're going to make this lovely syrupy mixture. I find the easiest way of doing this is to weigh everything directly into a saucepan. And we're going to start with a hot spoon, easiest to get your syrup out, 280 grams of two different kinds of syrup. This is golden syrup, and this one is what we call black treacle. Now Eliza Acton would have made her gingerbread with just black treacle, but for me, I think that's a little bit too strong for modern tastes. Then we're going to add some butter in little cubes, and there is 170 grams of butter here. I'm cubing it just so it makes it easier for it to melt. And then, it's quite a rich cake this, another 170 grams of brown sugar. And a lovely thing here, the zest of 2 oranges. Now Eliza uses lemons, and I actually think with ginger, orange is really a lovely flavour to have. Now I'm going to put that on the hob and let it heat, but very, very gently. And this is one of the reasons that you know Eliza Acton cooked her own cakes, because she says, don't let the butter get too hot, otherwise the cake will be heavy. She's full of really useful little tips. Whilst your syrup is syruping nicely on the stove, just melting gently, get ready 4 eggs. Crack them into a bowl, and then you're going to beat them and give them a bit of air with a whisk. Before we had raising agents, like I say, probably the middle of the 19th century, most cake recipes, the only air that you could get into them was from an egg. And there are some early recipes that tell you to beat your eggs for an hour. So it's nice and bubbly. Add about 4 tablespoons of milk. We need to get our dry ingredients back again. And to them, add this incredible rich mixture of syrup, butter and orange zest. In it all goes, and we mix it up really well. Gingerbread's a very interesting old cake actually, because there are recipes for it from Roman times, although in Roman days it was probably made with honey and different spices. And you find that everywhere in Northern Europe there are different recipes and different ways of doing it, and everywhere in Britain as well there are different recipes, and some are very short, snappy biscuits, some are quite kind of crumbly gingerbreads, and some are big ginger cakes. And it's always been a very festive cake, but I think we're kind of borrowing from our German and Scandinavian neighbours this idea that it's a really lovely Christmas cake as well. Once that's nicely mixed, we'll add quite slowly this egg mixture, a bit at a time. And you can't smell it, but I can smell all these incredible ginger, orange, sugary, buttery, even a tiny hint of cloves. And lastly, we're going to go a little bit off-piste here because this isn't an Eliza Acton's recipe, but Dickens does mention ginger, crystallised ginger, in his books. So we know he had it. Anyway, a little bit of chopped crystallised ginger is about a tablespoon, a good heaped tablespoon there. And that just gets mixed up. This is quite a loose mixture, as you can see. It's not one to go into a loose bottom tin. Now I'm going to use a bundt tin, which is quite Victorian in nature. They quite often use very elaborate tins to make their cakes in, and you might see them in antique shops labelled as jelly moulds. And actually, if they're tall, they probably weren't jelly moulds, because jellies can only really hold their shape to about that high. But you could still use them as a way of cooking a very kind of elaborate shaped cake. If you haven't got a bundt tin like this one, you need a square tin of about 23 centimetres. So this is ready to go in the oven. It needs a good hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes. It might even take an hour and a half. About quite a low oven, gas mark 3, 170, or drop it 10 degrees if you've got a fan oven. As you're cooking your cake, just test it with a skewer and to make sure it's cooked. And if the skewer comes out clean, right in the middle, then you know it's done. Let it cool in its tin for half an hour, 45 minutes or so, and then turn it out. Leave it to cool completely on a wire rack. And then when it's completely cool, you can just give it a little bit of icing. I've made this icing up with very simply icing sugar and some lemon juice, which I think complements the orange in the cake really well. It needs to be quite slack, and then just let it find its own little paths. Create some icing rivers. In Victorian times, Dickens and his friends would have often had cake with wine in the middle of the day, but I think the best way to enjoy this cake is with a really nice Victorian cup of tea.